Hi, and welcome to our Conceive Baby discussion today. For those of you who are joining us by the podcast, you probably won't notice any difference. But today I'm sitting here in person with Nicole Bijlsma. I'm usually speaking with people via remotely, often on the other side of the world. So it's really lovely to be here in person today and to be talking about such an important topic which really affects everyone, but is particularly important if you're wanting to fall pregnant. In fact, it's the topic of discussion for National Fertility Week, which is happening this week. And that's the effect that common household toxins have on our fertility. So firstly, for those of you who haven't joined us before, my name's Tasha Jennings, founder of Conceive Baby. I'm a naturopath, natural fertility specialist, nutritionist, and author of the Vitamins Guide and the Fertility Diet, as well as an expert contributor to many major media publications. And conceivebaby.com.au was really conceived following my own fertility struggles. And we're now blessed with two beautiful children. And my aim for Conceive Baby is to really bring together a team of experts across all aspects of fertility and preconception health to provide you with qualified expert information to help you achieve that same dream. And one of those amazing experts is building biologist, healthy home expert, media spokesperson, best-selling author and CEO of the Australian College of Environmental Studies, Nicole Bijlsma. Thanks for being here, Nicole.
Pleasure. Nice to be here in my office.
Yes, in your office, which is really fabulous. It's nice to have such an intimate discussion today. And we're actually just looking at a copy of your new book that you're putting into place, which is really exciting to get the word out there. And Nicole was actually one of my lecturers way back at college, so it's a pleasure to be speaking with her again today. So Nicole, you really did begin your career as a naturopath and an acupuncturist, but you changed your path to environmental health studies with some pretty major events in your life causing that. Can you tell us a bit about your journey?
Yes, it was two events that happened that changed my career. I was working as a naturopath and acupuncturist for about 15 years. And I started to notice a really strong connection between many of my patients' illnesses, especially things like fertility, headaches, asthma, allergies, insomnia, sleep disturbances, and chronic fatigue syndrome. But it wasn't until my husband and I moved into our home in Warrandyte that we developed insomnia, and I subsequently had 10 miscarriages in this house that I started to look at the way in which our homes could affect our health. What was interesting is the neighbour had said, no one had successfully had children in this home, even though it was 60 years old. And so I started to look at what was about the house because our sleep was affected and we were waking up tired and we were stressed, etc. So I realised we were sleeping on the other side of the wall of the meter panel, or the smart meter. It wasn't a smart meter then, it was a meter panel.
Yeah.
And also I started to look at air quality and realised that our master bedroom, which was closest to the T intersection, we would have triple the levels of traffic-related air pollutants coming up into our master bedroom, which would take 3 or 4 hours to dissipate by the afternoon, and then the afternoon traffic would kick in. So carbon monoxide levels would triple, nitrogen dioxide, etc. And we were sleeping above geopathic stress. So I said to my husband, I think this room is a problem. Can we move to the back bedroom? And we did, and successfully had kids. So that was a big clincher for me. And then walking into my patient's home and going, I spent 8 years at university. I went to China and did more training in Chinese medicine. Why aren't we trained in this? Why? And when I looked at the evidence, there was so much evidence for decades about the impact of air quality on human health. And then, of course, looking at electromagnetic fields, biotoxins, mold, chemicals, and everyday products, and going, this really needs to be taught. And because consumers can't make an informed choice if they don't understand how things are regulated and how the exposure standards are developed, because it's not there for, for public health, it's there for dividends for shareholders, and that's the problem.
That is a shame. It's not about health, it's more about making money. And particularly in regards to fertility, it's such an emotional issue, it's such an important issue. It's a life changer to be able to have kids or not have kids.
Yeah. Well, you assume you can have children. And when you start and it doesn't happen for you, when you want it to happen, it's like, what's going on? And I think, look, certainly timing is an issue as well. I mean, in the good old days, you didn't have the pill, you didn't have things like pregnancy tests to stress out about. You just had to wait till you're 4 months pregnant or showing before you realised.
Yeah.
But certainly fertility has been affected enormously, especially in the last 3 decades, and men's fertility especially, with the amount of toxicants in everyday products that are not regulated, that are hormone disrupting chemicals that have significant impacts on human health, breast cancer risk, ovarian cancer risk, and of course male and female fertility. And that's been well documented in the scientific literature.
And it's now starting to reach the mainstream media, finally, after decades. Obviously, it's well-published research. But there was actually a new research just published this weekend, I think, probably in relation to Fertility Week. And it found that common chemicals that were used in cleaning products, cosmetics, a lot of household products we use, and even our food are affecting our fertility. And now this particular study sort of said, okay, these results we should be aware of, but are not alarming. Whereas there was another researcher who said that basically if we continue on this path, humans will become extinct. It's affecting our fertility, and particularly, as you said, male fertility that much that we may not be able to reproduce anymore. Then what is the reality?
It is alarming, and it needs to be taken note. The problem is it's the way in which chemicals are not regulated. It's not geared for human health. So basically what happens is a manufacturer can release a product onto the market, and they are not required to test to see if it's safe or what impact it has on human health. Therefore, it takes researchers like me or, around the world, decades, years, generations to prove whether asbestos is a problem, whether lead dust is a problem, whether PVC is a problem, whether lead, all of these issues. I mean, human history is littered with missed opportunities and wasted resources, and medicine is in the dark ages because the focus isn't on the manufacturer, or the burden of proof is not on the manufacturer to prove their chemicals and products and shampoos, conditioners, moisturisers and garden care and building materials are safe. So it takes decades to prove conclusively whether it's a problem. And because we don't follow the precautionary principle, which is err on the side of caution if there's any evidence to say it's a problem, and the burden of proof is not on manufacturers, this is why we're in the problem that we're in.
Yeah. So what are the things we should be looking for people who don't know what they're using, who may be using these toxins unknowingly? Are there certain things we should look for on the back of packets? What labels should we be looking for to know?
Yeah, I think the main thing, well, certainly there's over 1,000 hormone disrupting chemicals in everyday products. That's the first problem that aren't regulated. The big one is pesticides. Many of the organic chlorine pesticides, DDT, Agent Orange, which are still in every human that's ever been tested, every child that's born still has this in their body, simply because it's held in the fat tissue and passed on in the womb, through the placenta, and of course breastfeeding is the biggest marker that passes on many of these toxins, unfortunately. In fact, breast milk is probably the best biomarker to determine how toxic we've become as a society, because breast milk is primarily fat, over 90% fat, and that's where most of these chemicals are. They're lipophilic, they like fat. So a lot of these babies are now born pre-polluted, hundreds of chemicals in their bodies, because the load increases over a lifetime in our bodies and passed on to the next generation. We know by week 14 of the pregnancy, if we're carrying a female child, that all her eggs are present. So whatever the mother is exposed to from that moment onwards affects not only her daughter, but all of her daughter's children. So we need to start looking. Preconception care is no longer 6 months before you want to get pregnant. It actually starts with the grandparents. And there's been some very important studies that have indicated the impact of transgenerational exposures. But pesticides would be the first one. Yeah. Many of these are hormone disrupting chemicals. So going organic is really important. If you can't afford it, then at least the ones in Australia that have the highest pesticide load are things like your apples and your berries. So buying organic frozen berries, etc., or going organic for those especially. Reducing your need for processed food and moving away from tin food, because of course we know they're lined with BPA, bisphenol A. In 1996, the Japanese voluntarily phased out BPA lined tins, and yet here we are in Australia Food Standards Australia and New Zealand said it's okay because it's in acceptable levels, which completely contradicts our knowledge about hormone disrupting chemicals, which is the lower the level of exposure, the worse the outcome. So when it comes to dose, these chemicals don't follow the rules. And we've realised with hormone disrupting chemicals, the lower the level of exposure in parts per billion, parts per trillion is sufficient to stimulate the hormone system because it's geared to react at very, very low levels. So for Food Standards Australia to say that about BPA plastic bottles are fine for children, that tin foods lined with BPA are okay, is actually contrary to what we know about hormone disrupting chemicals. It's contrary to the World Health Organization's 2013 report on the state of the art of endocrine disrupting chemicals and the International Federation of Gynecology's tender statement, which they released recently to indicate their concern about the impact on human fertility, etc., and breast cancer, prostate cancer, testicular cancer risk. So pesticides is a big one. Processed foods, tinned food is an issue, so move away. Go to things like glass bottles. Buy your fresh fruit and vegetables from scratch. Try to reduce your need for processed food. Pizza boxes, anything with grease-proof wrapping will have fluorinated chemicals, which are hormone-disrupting chemicals. All of your antibacterial products are a disaster for human health, and I go into detail as to why they're causing many of the asthma and allergy epidemics that we have. They target the thyroid gland, and they are a huge problem for human health in general. So any antibacterial wash, excluding if you work in a hospital setting, but at home there is no place for antibacterials because we now know that the more diverse the bacteria is in household dust, the less risk there is for asthma and allergies, which is why farm children have much lower risks. People with dogs and animals and furry pets have a lot lower risk of asthma and allergies because the pets have their own bacteria that they put into the household dust, which helps to stimulate a healthy immune response. So the use of cleaning products that are antibacterial like ammonia and Windex and bleach is a disaster for human health because it kills off bacteria, allows pathogenic bacteria to thrive, and therefore the immune system starts overreacting to things like food when it shouldn't be. Another one is alkyl phenols in cleaning products. Really should be avoided. Most of your cleaning can be done simply with microfiber cloths and a really good vacuum cleaner fitted with a HEPA filter and a motorized head. My husband and I manufacture our own cleaning product range because there was nothing on the market we could recommend to our building biologists who are training with us. And what we found was the reason why people with chemical sensitivities can use our products and people with eczema, etc., is because we use food grade ingredients, which no one does. And food grade ingredients means that our bicarb soda does not contain all the impurities naturally found in the ground, like toxic metals and uranium and thorium and mercury, lead, etc., which is naturally found in many makeups and many cleaning products because they don't use food grade ingredients. So we go with the whole organic with food, but when it comes to cleaning products, organic is irrelevant because most of the ingredients are not plant-based. They're mined from the ground. So food grade is what you're looking for. Other ones are perfume and fragrances. They're probably one of the biggest problem for women because they're high consumers of makeup and personal care products. Anything that says fragrance or perfume, 70% of these, according to the Environmental Working Group, are likely to contain phthalates or hormone disrupting chemicals, which have disastrous for human health and breast cancer risk. So it's really important you avoid anything that says fragrance or perfume because of the fact that they do target the reproductive organs and are a risk and a huge problem. Things like plastics, I don't think there are any safe plastics, and certainly we know the environmental impact and the Pacific garbage patch now, which is kilometres wide in the Pacific Ocean, is a huge disaster for human health because now we know many of these plastics are in almost all the fish in the ocean because we've contaminated them. We need to be mindful about how we use plastics and move away from plastic bags. Plastic's everything. I would store things like my oats porridge and nuts in plastic, but only because I don't want to throw them out because of the environmental issue. But for things like freezing food, heating food, you should always do that in glass or, for example, or Corningware, etc. You don't store or freeze food, especially meats and acidic foods like fruit, in any form of plastic, because the hotter or colder the plastic becomes, the more it leaches these resins into the food. Obviously, microwaving food in plastic is a disaster, and those takeaway containers, some of them are PVC, which contains phthalates, which is a problem, and polystyrene contains alkyl phenols, which is also a problem. So, go back to glass, stainless steel, especially for the children who are going through puberty, and that's really important advice.
Yeah, it's good to see this finally coming into fruition, because I know I had a friend whose dad worked for one of those companies who said to us, I remember I was probably only 8 at the time, about polystyrene, and never have a cup of tea or anything at the football where we go, just don't ever drink out of those polystyrene cups. So obviously he was aware of it back then, but it wasn't common knowledge. And it's good to see the research, and that there are publications like what was come out on Saturday saying that there is some slight issues. And when you say, I guess, endocrine disruptors, can we explain a bit more about that for people who may be listening that think, well, how is that affecting my fertility? What is an endocrine disruptor? What are these chemicals doing?
All right, we have different types of hormone disrupting chemicals. You have your plant estrogens, your natural phytoestrogens, which are very different to the xenoestrogens. So phytoestrogens are things like in your soybeans, for example, and in certain herbs like clover and fenugreek. And what you find is that they target plasma proteins and estrogen receptors within the body, and then that results in a cascade of events within the cell. With xenoestrogens, which are foreign estrogens in things like plastics and phthalates in fragrances and things like that, they act very different to phytoestrogens. So during pregnancy, what happens in the first trimester is the woman produces large amounts of plasma proteins, and the natural estrogens within the body, estradiol, for example, and the phytoestrogens will bind to those plasma proteins. Xenoestrogens, like in perfumes, don't. So and the reason why the woman does that naturally is because she doesn't want to expose the fetus to high levels of estrogen during the first trimester, during critical windows of development. Whereas xenoestrogens in environmental plastics and perfumes and pesticides and the things I talked about, they don't bind to these plasma proteins in the same way. So they're free to go into the placenta, into the fetus, where they can feminize the male. Now, we now know that in the first 14 weeks of pregnancy, the male, there's what we call the bipotential stage, which means that if you have an XY, in theory, male child, in the first 7 weeks, it's the bipotential stage, that male will become a female if testosterone is not produced by the testicles in that young fetus by week 14. So if the chromosome, the Y chromosome on the Y gene doesn't send a message to the testicles to produce testosterone, that XY male baby will become a female, and she will have all the secondary sex characteristics of a female, breast, uterus, the whole thing, and she will think female, and she will be a female phenotype, and she won't know she's actually genetically a male until she tries to have children and realizes she has no ovaries. So all human embryos are geared towards becoming female. So it's critical during week 7 to 14 that the male XY gene, male child or fetus, produces testosterone, but these xenoestrogens are interfering with that, and that's the concern. And certainly von Saal, who's the father of BPA, indicated in his male mice that because with mice you have lots of pups, that if the males were between two females and they were exposed to high levels of estrogen, when those males were born, they were aggressive, they were more likely to kill their young as adults. So estrogen isn't this nice fluffy hormone that's all very nice. It's actually, for a male, very aggressive and creates it masculinizes the brain very differently. So it's really important, these xenoestrogens, which many of these hormone disruptors are, and anti-androgens, affect male fertility especially. And the first sign of this is often young boy babies are born with genital malformations like hypospadias and undescended testicles. And of course, that is a huge risk for testicular cancer later on and infertility for that male. And that has increased 2% every year in Australia alone, genital malformations in young baby boys.
Wow, I know the stats on male fertility are incredible, and that's what most of the research is focused on. Male fertility obviously affects the females as well. It's such an incredible impact that these toxins are having. I think people are aware of them, as a lot of studies conclude that we have an awareness there, and maybe we should just be careful of these things. But it's obviously making a massive impact, not only on your ability to conceive, obviously, but the health of your future child. So, I mean, when do you consider people should start making changes? I mean, obviously, pretty much as soon as they can, obviously watching this and even considering wanting to fall pregnant, these are the changes you want to be making ASAP.
Absolutely. And look, male fertility has dropped 50% in the last 50 years. We know that. And it's interesting, in the last 50 years, what do? We changed farming practices. We introduced pesticides. Pesticides, in my first publication in the scientific literature, was about the way in which pesticides are associated with almost every chronic illness, because it affects, pesticides are antibacterial. So they affect the gut microbiome. If you affect the gut microbiome, your health is stuffed, for want of a better word, because what are pesticides? They're antibacterials. So really important to start with that. But yeah, absolutely. Where do you start? You start with getting healthier, reducing your chemical load. I often joke that my next book's going to be called Get That Shit Off Your Face. Because the amount of makeup and lipstick that is toxic in terms of their hormone disrupting chemicals, they should not be used, especially during pregnancy. These body butters that have fragrances that have a direct access into the systemic blood circulation, because they're rubbing them on their skin. And you've got to think about it. Once you rub this on your skin, it gets straight into the blood, where it gets into the placenta. So if that's not edible, why on earth are we putting them on our skin? But of course, we've got marketing, massive multi-billion-dollar companies trying to sell products to women they don't need, that are affecting their health, and consumers assume they're safe because someone would have tested it, when in fact the opposite is the case. So women need to be more aware of these issues. And of course, once they get breast cancer and the oncologist says, and by the way, stop using your perfume and your plastics, like, it's too late. The system is stuffed. So this is why it's important to have webinars like this, to get the information out there too, so that consumers can make an educated and informed choice. Because at the moment, most people don't understand how the system works and how broken it is. So the quicker you can reduce your toxic load, the better. Things to help reduce your toxic load, apart from, moving away from processed food, not putting aftershave and fragrances on, pests, don't use fly sprays around the house, and especially having something stuck to the wall that's spraying pesticides. I mean, it's an act of lunacy. Is to things like infrared sauna to detox. Make sure your bowel motion's at least one good bowel motion a day, because if your gut microbiome is right, then your ability to detox is better. And in fact, we now realize there's over 853 bacteria involved in the metabolism of chemicals, that the bacteria are probably more effective at detoxing chemicals than the liver.
Wow, that's where it all starts, isn't it? The immune system, the metabolism, the digestion, everything starts in the gut. And if that's not working well, which obviously these chemicals are influencing that to a significant degree, we're stuffed health-wise and fertility-wise. So,
exactly. And the thing is, with fertility, it's not essential for your individual survival. So the body will shut it down first, and focus on other systems for your immediate. So the reality is, for fertility, you have to be healthy in every other system before the body goes, okay, now you can reproduce. Because if you look at animals, when there's not enough food, if there's a long winter, etc., the fertility suffers, because the primary response in the body is for you to survive. So your fertility is the least important. Female athletes, what happens? Their periods stop. Why? Because it's not important to their survival. So to get the periods back, you have to be healthy on every level. Every system has to be healthy before your fertility kicks in. So that's why you have to look at every aspect of your life, the environment, your diet, your stress, your lifestyle, before fertility and your body goes, okay, now you can reproduce.
Yeah, and fertility is a massive issue. We're waiting longer to have kids as well. So everyone's having their careers. We go to uni, we have our career, and then we think, okay, we might want to have kids, when in reality, biology hasn't kept up with our social changes.
That's exactly right.
Biologically, we're still wanting to have kids in our early teens and 20s maybe, but definitely not our 30s, which is the norm now, I think. Now, recently I said 30 was the average almost, and between 30 and 35, most women are having their kids within that age bracket, which does reduce our fertility anyway.
Absolutely.
And you really want to be more than just supporting yourself. You want to be supporting a life. And my motto in all my newsletters is, being the best mum starts well before birth. And I think it starts well before you even want to think about conceiving. I love when you were just a twinkle in your father's eye. I love that saying. That's really when you want to start thinking about all these changes as soon as possible, not just when you get pregnant.
No, exactly right.
When a lot of people, it's like, when you've got breast cancer, now make the changes. Well, that's too late. And even when you've conceived, all of that DNA that you've already created that DNA, that's set.
Yes.
You can't change that from then on in. So
No.
making these changes as soon as possible
Yes.
really affects the health long term. And the gut microbiome, we do have some articles on there, and I did do a webinar with a specialist about the gut microbiome. So that's another really important topic which will help with this detoxification. And so, I mean, BPA, I did see recently is changing. There is a lot of awareness about BPA, but what are they changing it to? I know I'm just throwing this question in there for you,
Yes.
but I've had a lot of people ask me about BPA, and it's commonly known shouldn't have anything with BPA, but I have heard that what they're replacing BPA with has not been tested and maybe even worse than the actual BPA.
Yes, absolutely. So the bisphenol family, they've replaced BPA, which is one of over 1,000 hormone-disrupting chemicals, with bisphenol S and bisphenol F. And because the manufacturer isn't required to prove whether that also has estrogenic effects, they just replaced it because consumers were getting wind that this was a problem. So this is a system that's broken because the manufacturers, they're not scientists and they're not accountable. So they just replaced it because consumers didn't want it. So now they can market BPA free. But most of the BPA free plastics are BPS. So as I said, move away from plastics. You shouldn't be drinking from plastics. Look, if you're an adult, you've already gone through puberty, the impact of these hormone disrupting chemicals are less likely to have an effect on you than a child in the womb or in young childhood or during puberty because they're going through massive hormonal changes, but it's still a problem. And the reality is many of them are lipophilic. They like fat. So they sit, whatever you've exposed yourself to over a lifetime sits in your fat tissue to a small degree. And when you lose weight, such as during pregnancy, if you have a lot of nausea and vomiting, you can't keep food down. That's when most of that toxic load is released into your blood and goes into the placenta. So you want to be as healthy as possible. We now know the firstborn bears the brunt of your toxicity. And it's often the one who's going to, if you're going to get autism, it's often the first one. If you're going to have asthma and allergies, it's often the first child. And this is what we're starting to realize is because of these epigenetic effects and the fact that many of these toxins in the environment are in the fat tissue that stay in our fat tissue, which is why we all have these toxins to some degree, that you really need to reduce your exposure and get that crap off your face and to reduce your pesticide load in your food and not have it in the house. And this is why the book was so important, because it's simple tips that can make a big difference to the chemical load in your body. And the other thing is electromagnetic fields.
Yeah.
You know, the problem with electromagnetic fields and cell phones is they increase the permeability of the blood-brain barrier. So now you get all these chemicals in your body getting free access to the central nervous system, directly correlated with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and neurodegenerative disorders and things like that. So, you know, I mean, I use my cell phone. I show you in the book how to use it without to reduce your exposure to the radio frequencies by using text messages and SMS, etc., having an earpiece, not putting it near your head. Men should never put it near the reproductive organs because that's showing to be very strongly correlated with fertility-related problems. Women putting it in their bra, breast cancer right in the same area where their mobile phones are. I mean, there's so much of interesting evidence that's come out, and now we have a much better idea how electromagnetic fields affect the body at a cellular level, which I document in the book. But more importantly, it's the synergistic effect. So when you have wireless technology, you increase the permeability of the brain to the chemicals and the toxic metals and the pesticides all in your body. Now with Pandora's box is open. And this is why I think autism has just skyrocketed in the last 30, 40 years because of the introduction of pesticides, the introduction of wireless technologies and synergistic effects of just having devastating consequences on children. Yeah,
but as we discussed, it's an inconvenient truth. People don't want to know this information because it's very convenient to use your Wi-Fi and to store your pocket in your phone and have your mobile phone with you 24/7 and be available. But it's not something that is good for your health and also, your long-term, your fertility.
Yes. I mean, I love my technology because it means I can run my business anywhere, anytime. But I'm mindful, like, for example, during this interview, we have an Ethernet cable. It's not wireless.
Yeah.
So it's still possible. We can still have modern technology. I use my phone, but I never put it near my head. And I use my hardwired landline corded phone when I make calls.
Yeah.
So I don't have a cordless phone, which is just as bad as a cell phone. And there are ways we can live in a technological world and not be exposed to these hazards. Because you're right. I used to joke 20 years ago lecturing at the naturopathic colleges that it won't be a nuclear bomb that wipes us out. It'll definitely be infertility because of the introduction of these enormous amount of chemicals that have never been tested. There's over 140 million chemicals currently registered for use on the world's largest database, the Chemical Abstract Service, and every 60 seconds seconds, another 20 chemicals are registered. So about 200,000 new ones every week, and you can see it ticking on the American Chemical Society website.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm saying, well, this is why I wrote the book. This is why I developed the college, to train people in building biology, to get out to the homes and educate people what's going on, because it's not happening from the top down, and it's certainly not happening at a political level.
Yeah, because it's money. It's money to the shareholder. It's a business. It's going to cost a lot of money to make these significant changes, but they're affecting our health. So hopefully webinars like this, and in your book and your information that you're putting out there in the college as well, can help consumers get this information. And if you want more information on this, we will be putting information up about Nicole's book and all that, everything that we've discussed today, with links for you to be able to reduce your toxic load yourself, and help to not only help you conceive, but also the health of your future child. You are already nourishing all that precious DNA that has the potential to become your future child. And there are the epigenetic changes. You have the potential right now to, I guess, optimize the DNA that you are passing on to your future child, so to really improve their health for the longer term. So we'll be popping all that information on the website. So, and also be sure to, if you are watching this via the podcast or via YouTube, be sure to register on conceivebaby.com.au for all our live upcoming webinars, where we'll be speaking to specialists from across the globe and bringing you expert information to help you achieve your baby dreams. Thanks for your time.